Recently, the Oxford Dictionary Online, which is different than the Oxford Dictionary, Oxford English Dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary Online has this thing every year that they do. It's called the Word of the Year, and they announced its new Word of the Year, which is a word that never used to be a word, but because of some cultural development has become a word in a sense. The Oxford Dictionary Online, as I said, is different than the Oxford English Dictionary. The online dictionary is updated regularly to reflect these new such words, and over time, some of these words are taken off the list, some are added. And this year's new word of the year is selfie. Anyone heard of this? Selfie. Okay. Some have and some haven't. What selfie means is a photo you take of yourself with your phone. Okay? That's a selfie. That's the new word of the year. The Oxford English Dictionary, as opposed to the online dictionary, on the other hand, is more than just a dictionary. It also provides the etymology of words, that is, their origins, and also how the understanding of the word over time has changed. And because, as we know, over the course of time, the meaning of some words do change. It's only natural, but it's something we don't always think about. And not only that, it's actually really important to be aware of how a word has evolved. Well, it's not always necessary, but sometimes it does matter. Sometimes it's important because there are some words that are very important words, and if we don't fully understand the implications of certain words, we might make decisions that are not in our best interest or the best interest of others simply because we hear a word being used and we assume that we understand what's being said because we have a certain understanding of what the word means, but it might be different from what's actually being said, the meaning that's actually being expressed. And today we're going to look at one such word that's found in our first lesson from the prophet Isaiah, which Linda just read a few moments ago, and it says, "He will rule with fairness and justice." Okay? So we're going to look at that word justice. The word justice is because that's an important word. One of those rich words that's filled with lots of meaning that can oftentimes be defined differently depending on the context in which the word is used and who is using the word. So when I started doing some research on this word justice, I quickly realized that this was a rather large undertaking. To begin with, I learned that there are different ways of understanding justice, which wasn't surprising. The concept of justice is an old one and has been contemplated for thousands of years, obviously, because after all, today's reference is from the book of Isaiah, one of the oldest books in the Bible. And also, the philosophers Plato and Aristotle, you heard of philosophers Plato and Aristotle? They spent a lot of time writing about the topic of justice, and they lived around 400 BC. So even though the idea of justice is a popular one in today's world, it's an ancient concept with many ways of understanding it. Okay, now just really briefly, you're going to have to go with me on a little aside here because I'm going to talk about Plato and Aristotle just for a little bit, okay, the philosophers, because and I'll explain why I'm talking about them in a moment. Just hang in there for now, okay? Now, it's interesting to note that each of these two philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, had some foundational differences in their understanding of what justice is or was. And their foundational differences are worth understanding because it helps us to understand why two different people, even in today's world, might use the very same word and mean very different things. You see, Plato's understanding of justice relied first on his belief that people are generally good, and that it's this goodness that enables people to carry out true justice. So Plato thought we could carry out justice because we are good people. On the other hand, Aristotle's view of justice leaves the individual out of the equation, arguing instead that justice relates to situations as they stand on their own, and it's not necessarily impacted by individual circumstances. Now, at first glance, this might seem like an irrelevant academic exercise meant only for people in ivory towers who love to study words and to get at the heart of them, but this is not an irrelevant academic exercise because God wants us to participate in seeing justice being carried out in the world, and we can't participate in something when we don't really understand what it is. Having a broad and thorough understanding of the word justice is important as we interact with one another and strive to live out our Christian faith and put justice into practice. The difference in understanding justice, as expressed by Plato and Aristotle, is basic to understanding how we view ourselves as human beings. And I would have to say that Aristotle's understanding of justice is more faithful to the Christian understanding of human nature, even though Aristotle wasn't a Christian. He lived centuries before the birth of Christ, and he wasn't even a Jew anyway. But the reason his understanding of justice is more faithful to a Christian worldview is because of his understanding that justice needs to be carried out without the influence of details unique to each situation. Now, I'll give you an illustration from real life to illustrate that idea, an example. A couple of months ago, I got my first speeding ticket. I know. Not proud of it, I know. And I deserve many more, believe me. So, thank you. I was not happy about it. In fact, what made me the most disgusted about it was that it was from one of those automated traffic things. Because I've been stopped a number of times, but I never got a ticket until it was that camera. It caught me on camera, and a few days later I received my ticket. See, there was no cop, and usually when I see a cop, you know, woo, slow down, okay, maybe wave. And, or if you happen to get pulled over, well, officer, you see I was, and the kids, and okay, I'll give you a warning. So there was no one for me to explain myself to in that moment. Should simply say, I'm going to let you off with a warning this time. It was in the truest sense of the word, blind justice, right? I was speeding, I got a ticket. I have agreed to the terms of the law of the speed limit by getting behind a wheel and driving on a public road. The speed limit does not increase if I drive faster. If I make a choice to exceed the posted speed limit and therefore receive a ticket, that is my decision. And Aristotle would agree, and so would God. The laws are to protect us. We may break them because we are broken sinners, but that doesn't mean the laws change. On the other hand, Plato believed in man's goodness, that man could be a good person of his own choice, and therefore he believed individuals had the capacity to act justly without external influences such as laws. If Plato lived today, he'd probably lobby against speed limits altogether, claiming that people can control their speed because people are inherently good and left to their own devices would make the right decisions. I don't think so. And so the question of what is the truest definition of the word justice actually ends up being a question of the truest understanding of humanity. So, what do you think? Do you think that left to your own devices, you would always be inclined to do the right thing? Me neither. Because we humans are self-serving. Given the choice, we'd put ourselves before others. And as it is, most of us do, as often as we can get away with it. And many times we don't even realize we're doing it. After all, even Jesus himself said, "There is no one good but God." We are not good people. And if you thought you were a good person, I'm really sorry to have to be the one to tell you that you're not. And I'm really sorry if you didn't know that about yourself, but I'm guessing that most of you did. And why is it so important to understand and to admit that we're not good people? Because if we're really going to understand why Jesus died on the cross, we have to first admit that we are not good people, that we do not possess the proper level of goodness in our hearts that would ever make us acceptable to God. None of us. There's a passage about justice in the book of Leviticus that says, "You shall not render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbor." That particular passage is a true expression of blind justice. God calls us through his word to judge one another with justice. Or in other words, according to this passage from Leviticus, we are not to be partial to the poor or defer to the rich. So whether someone comes in rags or in a three-piece suit, the verdict is to be based on God, not on our human judgment, which is so often tainted and jaded. God's justice is blind, and is with this same kind of justice that we are to judge. And with that same kind of justice, we are to receive our neighbor into our midst. With justice, because we understand that all humans, ourselves included, are indeed broken. So, what might be the appeal, you may wonder, of a sermon that reminds us that we are not good enough? What's so uplifting about that thought? Well, because it's a lot easier if we just admit that we're sinners. Much less exhausting than trying to put on a show that we have it all together when we really know we don't. I'll give you an example. My family and I were at a wedding about a year ago in the Twin Cities, and we were at the hotel getting changed into our nice clothes to go to the wedding when I noticed that the hem of my slacks had come undone on one of my pant legs. And I was like, oh no, what am I gonna do? So I went down to the front desk and I got a little sewing kit, but I didn't have time to actually sew it up. All I had time to do was take the two little safety pins in there and pin up the hem. And I was so stressed out, wondered if anyone would notice and learn what I didn't want anyone to know, that I wasn't perfect. That is what I love about God. He already knows. He knows. It's a lot easier if we just go, okay, I'm not perfect. Yes, it's true. That's why his justice is blind. He doesn't need to know what we've done or not done in order to decide to save us. He knows what's more important to know, and that is that we need saving. He models for us what kind of attitude he expects us to have towards one another. And that is to not be partial to the poor or to defer to the rich. When we stand before God, we do stand as broken people, yes, but people for whom Christ died. Amen.